for that, but
Yeah, I've
instead
seen the ads for mud water. You like it?
I love it, man. It's
What do you?
longer lasting. It's longer lasting than coffee, and like it doesn't have the same issues in like your intestines and stuff. So it gives you
Really?
the energy. It allows you to stay focused. I love it.
Really? Well, okay. So let's just do a quick intro, real quick, and then we can keep talking about it because I want to I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about high ticket sales. And for those who are jumping in or jumping on later, it looks like Jessica is joining us as well. Jessica works with me at Sparkslides. Jessica, this is Tristan.
Hi,
Tristan, this
Tristian.
is
Nice to meet you.
Jessica.
Nice to meet you,
Um,
Jesse.
we were just talking about mud water, the coffee replacement,
Yeah.
because I've seen those ads. Jessica, have you done any of that?
When I went to visit my friend in Colorado, she had it. And so I
Okay.
did try it, and it was actually really good. And I have not gotten it for myself yet, but I do want to transition
Were
from
you a
regular
heavy coffee
coffee.
drinker, Tristan? Were you heavy?
Not so much. I was more of an energy drink guy, but I saw that as a better alternative
Oh.
because you can only drink
Then
so much.
energy drinks. Yeah. That's too funny. Well, okay, so I was given a quick intro, and that was to anyone popping in, watching this later, or anyone watching now. This is Tristan Peters of Peters Brothers Consulting, and many other things brewing in the background. Tristan and I connected because of the crypto show.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of Not Crypto Bros, and we connected over LinkedIn. The power of the internet, and we've talked several times. And I think we're birds of a feather, and energetically, and on a lot of other ways. But for those watching, we're here to talk about. This could go anywhere, but we're going to start off talking about high ticket sales because this is, if I'm not mistaken, Tristan, correct me. This was the major turning point for you as like you had a career. I was looking at your LinkedIn. You had this career path of like, I'm doing, solar sales. I'm killing it in solar sales. And then you spun off to consulting, and that kind of opened up another world that maybe we'll get into. But I mean, would you agree that were you already kind of like on fire before Peterson
So
Brothers?
yeah, so I've done a lot of different sales jobs. I've done a lot of different things, and I've always had a passion for teaching people.
Yeah.
So here's what really kicked that off. I moved to Texas from Utah about 3 years ago. Worked at this solar company, saw some early success as a sales rep. After about 6 months, got to be their national sales trainer. Helped as it
Mm,
grossed $30 million Q1 of 2021.
wow.
And the salary for large corporate training is not great. And I went, okay, if I can do this, what's possible for what you can do for outside clients? So I did a
Yeah.
little test phase, and then I ultimately into that, and that's kind of where the entrepreneurial journey began.
Now, correct me when I think about you. I've been thinking about you in terms of high ticket sales. Would you define you do sales training, and you might do like large contracts to do sales training, but would you consider on the sales side what you do to be high ticket sales or high volume sales?
I would say a little bit of both. So some of my clients, I mean, a lot of the guys, I do a lot of remodel companies. I had a company that I worked with that does luxury backyards. So I mean, your minimum entry price for that is 100,000 to $500,000 for a backyard. And then you go
Okay.
to like the spring sales side, where sure it's a $5,000 to $6,000 investment, but for a lot of people that's not high ticket.
Yeah,
So I would
yeah. I mean,
say
it's yeah.
both.
But your contracts are pretty significant. I mean, like you might have been doing decent six-figure commissions doing the sales jobs, but then you went in and started your own consulting firm, and you immediately started getting decent contract sizes, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest difference between me and a lot of your other sales coaches, I'm sure everybody scrolls through Instagram and you see the ad, hey, buy my course. I know how to do this.
Yeah.
I'm not here to teach you some crack sales method, and I don't charge any money up front, at least as of right now. So our process, what we do, we get engaged by a client, and then essentially we go undercover billionaire style into the business. So I get hired as if I'm a new sales rep. I go through their training,
Oh,
I get to know their sales team, and then I expand on what I think they could be teaching better, how their process works,
oh.
make tweaks that way. And then once the training is implemented for all new hires as well as existing employees, then we take a percentage increase on the back end after that training is complete.
That's a pretty significant. That's so in sales we call that risk reversal, right?
Yeah.
And so that's you bearing a lot of risk, right? Um, are you, have you ever gotten skunked with that deal?
Not yet. No. I've not, well, a lot of the time, if you add any new energy into a sales team, you're at least going to see short-term success, right?
Yeah.
The big thing is we have some contracts that they renew just because due to the fact of the ever-changing environment of educated buyers.
Yeah.
The majority of my niche for training is in-home sales as well, and you can't go and be pushy at someone's kitchen table. You can't do that.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
Consultative sales don't work as well anymore. You can't be pushy. You've got to allude and ask questions, and you got to treat them like people. And it's all these simple things that you know to do, but a lot of these guys have been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years. They do it one way and that's it.
Yeah. Well, so this leads me to some thoughts here. So number one, like on the sales consulting side, do you have an ideal client?
Um, like I said, a lot of it is in home, and if their sales force is between 75 and 100, that's where we usually like to play. The biggest reason that we target in-home sales companies or direct-to-customer sales companies is because a lot of the times their salespeople don't have a ton of sales skills,
Yeah.
and B, their customer service is just non-existent.
Yeah.
Implement how to treat people like people in a follow-up process that's nearly automated, and you'd be surprised how many businesses grow 30, 40, 50, 100%.
Wow. Now people don't realize this. I don't think the general public realizes this. Direct sales or in-home sales is quite often, but not always, not quite often. It can include MLM. Have you ever
Yeah.
done any MLM training?
No, I've stayed out of that. I know a lot of guys
Sure.
that knock on doors and sell life insurance. I
Oh,
never got
yeah.
into that industry. You can do really lucrative things with it, but again,
Yeah.
there's that stigma behind it, and it's really hard to change stigma,
Oh,
especially for
yeah.
educated players.
Well, and as you're talking about in-home sales, and I did see your history of doing solar sales. Anyone who's ever tried to sell me solar, it's been in-home.
Yep.
And it has been an abysmal process where I'm like, brass tacks, show me this. And then you hear, all of these buzzwords, like you get the energy credit, so that comes off the price, and you get this and that's cheaper. People can sell me if they keep it simple. Like good salespeople don't mind being sold,
Great.
But it is such a bad process that start to get bent out of shape at how poor the process is. And I have yet to buy from these solar guys because I'm like, you don't even know what you're talking about at this point. Is it going to damage the roof? Is it going to do this or that? And you could tell there's been very little. They've gotten a lot of no's, but there's been very little actual training on the product.
Right. Well, you're in that industry, like the acceptable close rates for most companies is between 8 and 12%. Like you're going to have a 90% failure rate. They're just okay with that. And that's what blows my mind, especially the customer acquisition cost. I mean, you're paying $2,500 to acquire a client a lot of the times in those deals. The crazy thing about the solar industry is again, those guys, they learn a few buzzwords and they want to word vomit.
Yeah.
The best thing you can do is if you can explain the process for what you're selling to a kindergartner, it's really hard to get to know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I bet, and it can make sense. Like when I think about on my own, when I think about the math of us in this example of purchasing a solar grid for my house, I'm like, well, the math makes sense. And over time it does this. And I could sell myself on this in a few basic ways, but they get in the room and they start talking about the loan structure and the build out structure. And it's like, bro, like, has anyone ever told you talk too much? You've gotten mired. Well, that's interesting. So, okay, so that's your ideal client. What is the biggest challenge these clients, like consistently you go in and you could predict to a person that they're always making or they're facing this one challenge? What's a consistent challenge these organizations are facing?
Probably the idea of just the lack of follow-up for a lot of these guys. I mean, it's a one-call close type thing. And if they don't get the yes the first time, they give up on it. And again, you're throwing marketing dollars away that way. Throw it in a drip campaign. You don't even have to do anything. But a lot of these companies, they just don't have that infrastructure, especially at the smaller level, 900,000 to 10 million a year. They just don't think that's necessary because they've grown so fast that they think that growth won't stop. But implementing basic follow-up processes it makes the world of difference.
Like they just don't have a CRM that already has a drip set up?
No, like they'll have a CRM. Like a lot of these guys that I walk into, they use a Go High level product. Like I'm not knocking it. It's a great starter product, but once you start to do $10 million a year, you got to evolve at a Go High level or at least add some sort of marketing tool alongside.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what are the common mistakes they're making they're facing, you said the mistake they're making is that they're not doing follow-up, but the challenge, what is the challenge they're facing?
I think a lot of these guys, especially when they jump on commission only, that's the other thing I try and implement with companies is like it's some sort of a 6-month draw program. Because if you're a brand new sales guy in a brand new industry and you're commission only, and let's say this is your first sales job, your customer's going to smell the desperation on your breath. And you really can't teach people out of that. You can try, and a lot of guys have the verbiage, but they can't push the energy in the house. So having some sort of draw set up for a lot of the clients is what we implement. Because you pay somebody $2,500 a month for the first 6 months and they make a couple of sales, and then they jump straight to commission after they've got a few mistakes under their belt. That improves employee retention tenfold, and it makes them more money.
Now, Jessica, have you ever done straight commission job?
I tried to sell cars for 9 months. Yeah, we can all laugh about it. I was horrible. I cared about the customer way too much. They called me the customer advocate, and I did not make any money.
I know. I was laughing because I was just picturing sweet you like selling cars, and I'm like, I don't know if you have the teeth.
I grew up in real estate, so I was like, I can sell cars. Like I can do sales, and no, I just.
Oh my God. So, okay, this raises a getting to know everyone question. Tristian, this is to you first, and I'll share in a second. What's the earliest you can remember selling, and what were you selling? Like, how far back is your sales history?
That's a good question. I'd probably say high school, because I grew up on a cattle farm in Nebraska. We do a couple of different things: sell hay bales, sell cows, things like that. I would say that's probably my earliest sales experience.
Selling hay
and cows.
And cows. That's a big one.
Yourself for free labor. That's the big thing. Hey man, I know you need some help around here, and throw me $100. Cool. If not, then we'll make it up some other way. But I think that's probably the earliest is hard goods that way.
I think I recall the earliest I can recall is selling my own art in the street. And I needed extra cash. And so I sold art in the street, and I sold cartoons. I drew cartoons for in Florida, we have mosquitoes, and we have them so much. We have what's known as mosquito commission in every county. And I knew someone running for mosquito. I was a kid. My parents knew someone who was running for mosquito control. And I was like, I'll draw your cartoon. I sold that. And they used it on their stuff. I felt so proud. So they know they have a problem with employees not working on straight commission. Before you guys get in there, what are the common mistakes they're already making on solving that problem? Is that problem meaning they're over on labor of people that aren't salespeople? Is that kind of what they're looking at? They're heavy on labor?
More or less. I think the biggest issue a lot of these owners find is that they hit a certain level of success, and whether it's greed or being terrified, it's one of those two generally, because they try and micromanage everything. A lot of small business owners are really, really bad at delegation and giving up trust. So they're cool with the turn and burn mentality. Like, awesome, this guy will make 2 sales for me. He'll quit in 3 months, and I'll have another guy right in the door that'll do the same thing. That's not how you build a long-term business. Sure, you might make a couple $1 million in 5 years, but then you're going to be up a creek.
And you're paying to the 6-month draw whatever draw on all the new blood, whereas a seasoned salesperson is now worth their salt, and you're not paying any draws. That's interesting. So, I agree with you. The average small business knows jack about sales. They're proactively avoiding marketing in a big way. And they're trying to solve that through operations, or they're trying to solve that through, I just get word of mouth. And lo and behold, the pandemic hits and they wonder why they're struggling. What's something that when you go to network, I know you sell this, so you don't give away your advice for free, but you're at a networking meeting, someone hears, hey, you solved their sales issue. What's some advice I could take right now? What's the one thing hey, this one's free, go do X. What's that advice you always give them?
Yeah, it is that simple. That's the advice I always give them. Whatever you think that you need to do with jargon or verbiage in your industry, or explain in-depth processes, it should be simpler. That's oftentimes how we solve a lot of the problems, because again, like we talked about, these guys want to go in there. They want to show that they know everything. They want to answer all your questions. But if you could, again, explain it like they're a kindergartner, and anybody can teach that.
And do you find that advice is accepted or rejected?
It's about 50-50. And then depending on the response to that one, the other big piece that I give to just small business owners is If your sales guys can answer every question in a person's house, that's great. Have them answer the first 4. And then even if they know the answer to the 5th, tell them to tell the prospect, hey, I'm not quite sure about that. Let me check on it. Because that validates the other 4 answers you just gave, and it doesn't sound like you're full of it.
Oh, that's good psychology.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Because I'm willing. You're showing that you're. What is that called? It's the law. There's a law there. I don't know. In pickup artistry, I think it's called. No, seriously, I think it's called like the law of reciprocity or something like that, where, or inverse psychology, something like this. Where I'm going to butcher it, so I abandon it. But it's this person is an honest person because they said, I don't know. Oh, that means these other things they said are true.
Right.
That's huge. Now, now, not to be ageist, you're a relatively young guy.
Yeah.
Is principles like that, which I'm sure if you're doing sales consulting, you have an array of these thoughts. Mm-hmm. Are principles like that learned? Like, did you come up with the verbiage for that yourself, or have you been a student yourself?
Oh, for sure. I'm learning every day. The best method to seeing success is it's awesome to try and do something new, but I use the R&D method, the rip off and deploy method. Obviously you take great knowledge from each person that you meet, and you can conglomerate it in your own way. Everybody does that, and whether or not you want to be honest about it or not, that's completely up to them. But yeah, man, if I find something that works and I ask for permission, as long as it's not IP, I say, yeah, let me use that, and then I'll incorporate it into my business.
What is the best piece of advice on this journey as you were transitioning out of being a sales rep for others, building out your consulting firm? What was the piece of advice you clung to the most?
Interesting question. It probably came from my attorney, and he said, never do anything without an NDA. First of all, and then second of all, he says, hey, if I could tell you that you were 2,000 no's away from being a billionaire, how fast would you want to get the next no? Because I had a string where I was getting 10, 15, 20 no's in a row, and I said, hey man, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And he goes, well, what if I told you were 2,000 no's away from being a billionaire? And I said, well, I'd get 1,999 no's as quick as possible. And he goes, exactly. So just keep going.
I like that.
I like that. And I think we know that, like what we used to say on the sales, you don't know this about me. I ran a telemarketing floor for a while.
I did not know that.
So get this product, bro. So the product was tax negotiation. And these were our target clients, Jessica smirking. Our target clients were tax evaders. So we had a call list, and we had to make 300 dials a night. And so I ran the night shift. We had 40 openers, and we had about 7 closers. And the product cost, and this was 2003, the product cost was $1,250, but on the back room, we would double or triple that. And Jessica, you may or may not know this, but like we'd make them FedEx us a $1,250 check. And then like a week later, we'd be like, we think this is moving forward with the IRS, but we're not really sure. We're going to need another $1,250. Truth was, it was solved. Like this was a very dishonest business, right? and they would see how many times they could do that, right? And so, I mean, the thing made money hand over fist because the average client owed in excess of $150,000. Now, people don't know this about the IRS, but they will abate over half of that off the top if you say you'll work on a payment plan. That simply means that, well, you owe $150, I'll make it $75. That's it. That's all you owe, as long as we do a deal and you're consistent on your payments. And then you try to get the payments down. But people are petrified. We had PIs on staff looking for these people. So it was a nuts sales thing. But the smile and dial game it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to keep someone on the phone in 2 questions or less. And that was a tough, because these people are like evading the IRS. Like it could be the man at any moment. So I say all that, A, it's a fun story, but B, everything is just a numbers game in terms of, do you ever use this language, Tristian, leading actions and lagging actions?
For sure. Yeah.
So like a lot of times people are like, well, my net sales are X. And you're like, well, technically there's literally nothing you can do about that number. There's nowhere you can go to push that number, but you can push how many doors you knock on, how many people you sit in front of. You can push your skill set. And Jessica also has a part-time job as a server. She's worked in service. I've worked in food service. And it does end up turning into how many times can I offer dessert? Here's one. If I offer dessert at every single table, at some point, someone's going to say yes. That's interesting.
Serving staff are some of the best recruits, especially for like initial sales jobs, because those people will work the worst hours and gamble on everything on tips. Like they care about their customer base. They're not used to making a lot of money generally, unless you work at a high-end place. But they get to the process and run hard for 6 months before they burn out, if they burn out. But a lot of those guys, especially if I'm recruiting like partial portions of a sales team, if I go out and I have a really great server and I recruit them for that, and I say, give it 3 months and see what happens. They call me 4 months later and they go, hey man, I made $10,000 in a month. I want to keep doing this. Great.
Wow.
Do you think so? This is a question. So people don't know this about me. I do personality coaching, like temperament coaching, like what's your temperament? And we often reference the DISC profile system. But let me ask you, is there a continuous temperament for good salespeople?
I would say like, I don't know. I think it depends on what you're selling. That's a good question.
Really?
I think it depends on what you're selling. Yeah. Also, like the outdoor company that I was speaking on earlier, their best sales guy is a retired 55-year-old man who looks like your grandpa, and all he does is speak slowly and laugh with you and smile. And he'll spend 5 hours in the house, but he, like 2 or 3 months ago, closed a $500,000 backyard to a single family. That's crazy.
Wow. And his closing ratio, he might do fewer appointments, but his closing ratio is higher.
Correct. Yeah. You might see like, so the rest of that company, maybe you're at 10, 15% closing. This guy's at 30.
Wow. Okay. And he's got the old guy thing going. He's not a pedo, he's well-dressed,
Versus if you go into a cell phone store and you meet with some 25-year-old that really needs to pay for dinner tomorrow for his date, then that's a different type of avenue.
Let me ask you this, because so there's the tactics of sales and there's the skill of sales. And we do a lot. I did some vocal inflection coaching for Liberty Tax, like how you end a sentence. You end it with a rising tone, not a falling tone. Like I get into all of that stuff. And, I sprinkle the fact that I've even looked into pickup artistry just to learn how they do their thing, Yep. But what are the unseen elements of a sale? Like, an angsty 25-year-old versus a 25-year-old who's grounded. Like, I'm just a grounded guy and I don't like, what are some of the ephemeral, like subjective things that are really hard to nail down from a tactics perspective?
That's interesting because, again, then it goes into leave all your baggage at the door when you come to work, which is really hard to teach and actually do. But when you meet a new person, it's about, you can feel energy between people. Like if you meet somebody who's shady, you can feel that they're shady a little bit.
Yes, so I do believe that.
Yeah. And so if you can have a welcoming, open type of energy that you put off when you greet prospects, whether it's forced at first and then it becomes natural, if you can greet somebody with a smile and have open body language, a lot of the times it's going to increase your closing percentage drastically.
So Jessica's a very well-read person. Jessica, let me ask you this, because you've done all kinds of sales before and you've done a lot of people work and including service. Like, are you generally accurate, Jessica, when you have a table, like a group approach a table and you go, this is going to be I'm going to get skunked on tips or it's going to be awesome. How often is your intuition wrong?
Quite often.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Like, it happened to me last night. I had this table and I was just like, oh yeah, this is going to be a good tip. Like, at least like what we would expect someone to tip, but it was not at all. And I was shocked. But then you have other people that I try not to like judge people or expect anything. I usually don't even count my tips till the end of the night because I don't want it to affect my mood. Yep. But yeah, I'm surprised a lot. So, in that industry, I can't say, I just hope, I just hope that people know how to tip, but then I get like surprised a lot of times. Like I got a 5% tip 2 nights ago and I just couldn't believe it. I was like, I think this is the first time I've ever in my life gotten a 5% tip. But wow. But then I also tried to like feel for the guy. I was like, oh, he was here with his 4 kids and his wife on a Friday. Maybe he couldn't afford to take her out, but wife was like, we're going out to eat. So he just gave me very little because he didn't have a lot. I don't know, but
maybe it is a numbers thing. Like, and Jessica's an extrovert like I am, so she talks to a lot of people just out and about life. But I wonder, there came a point where I trust my intuition way more than anything else. And maybe it's woo-woo. Like, it could be some woo-woo BS. But like, when I go into a room, I allow myself to make snap judgments, but I can compartmentalize that and hope that the conversation can go a different direction. And I guess I'm often surprised, kind of, Jessica, like you're saying, like, oh wow, I mean, they shocked me in this outcome. But I don't know, like, and I would even ask this, Tristan. So, sneak peek into stuff we will or won't or might talk about is Tristan's now on a rocket to the moon in some of his other networking abilities with deal making. And without getting into any details, like your deal, Mark Sheeran jumps in, FYI. And this is why I love doing a live show. Mark Sheeran says positive mental attitude is number one. This is what you're saying. Leave your baggage at the door. Do you find your intuition, Tristan, carries over whether you're making a $200,000 contract deal on sales coaching or a $300 million deal making on something? Like, absolutely. Is the intuition is the same?
And I do the same thing, even like on the project funding side, because I'm sure we'll jump into that in a little bit. But depending on what investor I'm approaching about it and what the project is, I trust intuition on that more than any numbers ever. You could show me the best pro formas and you could have had a great career, but you have little idea about how this is really going to go. And you've only thought of positive versus negative.
Yeah.
But intuition, 110%. Like, it's great. You can have the best resume in the world, but if I get a weird feeling about you, I'll say no to you.
Yeah. Now, and on the deal making side, the funding side, you told me on another call that you do background checks.
Yeah, on everybody.
Similarly to my question to Jessica about, hey, you get an intuition, I'm going to do my due diligence, right? My gut's not the only thing that's going to lead me to war or not. So I'm going to do these background checks. Are you ever surprised by your background checks?
I mean, every third one probably, yeah. There's just always something on there, like sometimes you'll find people like in their early 20s, like got their license suspended because they were driving 150 miles an hour or something like that, or you see something that doesn't line up in financials. Let's say that somebody closed on a bankruptcy 3 months ago, but they didn't disclose that in the financial documents, and you go like that, and you're like, okay, well, if you're hiding this, what else is there?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. It's never about the thing. It's always about the principle of living behind the thing. And I'm glad you said that, because a lot of times people will hide their histories, whether, like, I was a Starbucks manager for a while and people would hide a drug history or something. And I would say, listen, I mean, as long as we're not talking hard drugs, they got caught with some weed when it was still really bad. But my real concern is what you were afraid of in answering the question. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they were afraid that I might not hire them because they had a drug past. Now, I've kind of fulfilled that story loop, because I'm not going to hire them because I found out they had a drug past. But I'm not going to not hire them because of the drug past. I'm going to not hire them because they hid it. And the hiding is a thing. And so what Mark Sheeran is positive mental attitude is number one. We all can kind of agree. Let me ask the inverse. In your experience as a sales consultant, have you ever found an extraordinary salesperson who was a negative Nancy?
It's a good one.
I don't think so. At least not thus far. Some of the bigger companies that I've worked with, like, you meet some of their chief sales officers and they're happy-go-lucky a lot of the time, but they'll be hard on you when you need it. But I don't think I've ever met anybody who's really good at selling or customer service that is an undertone negative person. It's not sustainable. You know what I mean? If you always have to have something to complain about, you're going to put yourself in a box to where not a lot of people want to be around you, and certainly no stranger wants to buy anything from you.
No. And I imagine as the stakes go up, the things we're talking about matter more. They probably don't matter more than the practice. Like, let's say you're doing a deal for 30 million or 50 million on something. You're going to do the background checks. The fundamentals have to be there. This person has to have the cash in escrow. But you get the willies. And you're like, well, I don't know if I'm feeling this, because relationships matter so much more at that level. And then someone comes in as a negative Nancy, and you're thinking, you were just describing a deal that was complex with a country in South America, right? And like, there's some complexities here, and I'm going to need some believers in our team here, because I don't need a bunch of yes people, but I do need a bunch of we can do that. We just got to figure out a way.
Exactly.
And I can imagine that let me ask you that. It's a lot of happy-go-luckies. It's a lot of people that are saying, we could do that. There might be some challenges, but we can do that. Is it funner at higher
Absolutely.
levels?
It's
Really? Just
it's
because of the
almost
money, or because of the attitudes?
the attitudes. One, it's almost easier. Like, to be honest, like if you're doing a $30 to $50 million funding deal, like people who have that money, it's a really small group of people, and they know what they want when they want it. So there's not a whole lot of back and forth. Like there's not objections in the investing world for the most part. At that level, if somebody wants to buy a company, unless there's some massive discretion, they're gonna buy it.
Interesting.
And then also I would say that it is more relationally based, and that's why
Yeah.
I spent the last 2.5 years going to every networking event possible to put my hands in every industry. So that way, if somebody calls me with a problem, I'm like, oh, let me make a couple of phone calls and I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
More often than not, though, in the private equity investing world, things like that, your initial intermediaries, a lot of those guys are yes people, and it turns a lot of large scale investors off. Like if you're somewhere between $1 million and $100 million, that's a big range. But if you're trying to invest in a project there, and you're biz dev guy for your private equity firm, somebody asks him a question, he goes, yeah, absolutely, we can do that, no problem, and then doesn't ask follow-up questions that are meaningful, that investor will get back. Because all those guys are like, oh man, this is 2% commission on $100 million. I'm going to make $2 million. I've got to make this happen. But they aren't transparent with their investors.
Yeah, it's almost like, if you're a negative Nancy, no one wants to do business with that. I didn't make all this money, and I'm not dealing with all this money to put up with negative Nancys in the world. However, on the flip side, if you are only happy-go-lucky and everything is unicorns and rainbows, I don't trust you're bringing nuance to the deal either.
Exactly.
That's interesting. I heard your sentence. It's funner. I imagine it's funner, especially because then you contrast that to a company that, is under 10 million, and they really need their sales revenue to squeeze out another 10 to 20%, and you're on the hook for that. You got to sit in front of a board sometimes, or VPs, and explain why this one tactic didn't work. And everyone's super tense, and now you got jobs. Those middle income people seem like, have you ever read the book The Millionaire Next Door?
No, I'll have to put that on my list.
Oh, Tristian, I think you would dig this book.
Okay.
So the anecdote was this. This is the picture that came to mind. The authors of the book wanted to understand ultra high net worth individuals, and they wanted to understand middle income and low income individuals. So they interviewed a bunch, and they thought, ultra high net worth, we need to put out a spread. So they put out this spread of caviar and Perrier water. And they said of the 100 people they interviewed of ultra high net worth, it made them uncomfortable. They were wearing Walmart clothes. Only one of them wore a Rolex. There was all this food and caviar, and only one of the 100 even got a cracker during the interview. And so they were done. The ice was melting. The shrimp was getting warm. The caviar was getting warm. And they tell this anecdote. They're like, we can't throw all this out. So on the floor of the building in New York that they were doing this interview, they're like, we got to find someone who will take this. So they looked across the hall, and it was a trading desk. These guys all driving Lambos. They're all wearing Rolexes, but these are not ultra high net worth individuals. These are middle wealthy people. They love the caviar. They love the shrimp. They love the Perrier water. And it defies expectations on what people really value. And this is why I love the study of wealth. And this is why I love your trajectory, because you've seen, at this point, you're getting exposed to all sides, but you started on this farm. Let me ask you that. You made this question, and you alluded to this in a previous conversation we had. You said, selling hay, selling cattle, heck, selling free labor sometimes.
Yep.
And then you told me how you actually got in the room with some of these wealth-minded and deal-minded individuals. Could you share with Jessica and the public kind of the offer you were making at the time to learn the industry?
Yeah, yeah. So it's really similar to what Alex Hormozy talks about. I mean, if you see somebody living the life that you want to live, you find out a way to get in the room. My tagline right now for a lot of the guys that I meet is, "I've made a career out of getting into rooms I don't belong in and finding out how to stay there." You meet these guys and you play on the blue collar past and how you're going to be the first generation wealth in your family, and then you just want to learn the skill. I don't need money from you. I want you to teach me how you think, and I'll add value wherever I can. If you don't want to pay me, that's fine. But I want to know how you do what you do and why you do it, so that way maybe I can do it better. And a
Yeah,
lot of these
man.
are surprisingly supportive of that because they understand it's a 5 to 10 year runway to figure out how to really do this at a high level. And if
Yeah.
you or partner with them even on a couple of projects over 5 or 10 years and you make them 30, 40, $50 million, they go, "Hey, thanks, kid."
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever watched someone who's coming up like you in those circles get blacklisted?
Absolutely.
Is it overt or low key?
It's a mix of both. So
Interesting.
if you know what it's, I would argue it's probably more low key. So these guys, I mean, they're gonna make you really look into the depths of your soul when they tell you they're not gonna work with you anymore. But the
Yeah.
thing about that arena is it's always very clear, concise, and quietly spoken. It's not like your
Yes.
parents screaming at you. Those guys,
Yeah.
they'll have a straight face. They'll say everything with just a certain level that it's just a heavy weight to the words, and they say, "I hope
Hmm.
I never see you again," or something of that nature, and it
Yeah.
crushes those people. And
Yeah.
then they're trying to fight and claw for a way back in, but a lot of the times that there's not, and generally the 2 times I've seen it happen is just for oversight and lack of attention to detail or trying to do everything by themselves.
Mm.
Everything by themselves. There is a thing of poor-minded individuals who are staying poor and keep themselves down at whatever tier. Like we could be talking about any tier.
Mhm.
And their belief is, I am doing this myself. And that is a red flag for some of the millionaire mentors I have had. Jared jumps in and says, a lot of people struggle with imposter syndrome. Tristan knows Jarrett. When they're in rooms they're not supposed to be in. Any story or anecdote of how you dealt with imposter syndrome? Great question, Jarrett. Tristan, have you dealt with this actively?
I wouldn't say that I've dealt with it. I've certainly been questioned on why I'm there, and it's more important that there's a great anecdote or a line for that. It's better to keep your mouth shut and let them think you a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt. So these guys, a lot of these guys, especially that are new to the scene. So let's say you have a group of investors. One of them's doing it for 5 years, one for 10, and one for 20. The 20-year investor is going to see how you move and how you speak, not necessarily what you say. The new guy is going to
Mhm.
go, okay, well, if you can be here, I should have been here sooner. So give me everything about you, and I want to know every detail, and I'm gonna pinprick you wherever I can. And you go, hey
Mhm.
man, it's okay that you don't think that that's going to happen. Let me show you with actions, not words. And a lot of the
Yeah.
times that sets them up because what's your response to that?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
if you're not supposed to be there and you have no idea what you're doing, maybe tread that a little more carefully. But
Yeah. So
listen
you
far.
never dealt with imposter syndrome.
I don't think so. It's one of those things. Like now, I've
Interesting.
hit goals in such short amounts of time that I go, okay, what's possible now? Like I'm gonna try and chase $1 billion generated this year, and
Yeah.
that's a crazy goal. Like
Yeah.
2 years ago, if you had told me that that was the goal, I'd have been like, yeah, probably not, man. I work at a shoe store. Like,
Yeah, I've been there. And I never thought I dealt with imposter syndrome myself. But there were moments that I was highly aware of, like, you remember that you guys might not remember Sesame Street. On Sesame Street, they had a segment called "Which One's Not Like the Other," and
yep.
like I know that I'm the one who's not like the other, and I was highly aware, and so I did kind of not shrink myself, but guard my tongue extraordinarily well, or I tightly. I made sure that I wasn't thinking as sublimely as your quote was, but I knew that I could burn myself if I say the wrong thing. Quick anecdote on that, about the low key blacklisting people. I worked for a real estate investor in the early 2000s, and I watched him have his little come up. And in the early 2000s, he turned what was, I think, listed as a $1.5 million property. He negotiated it down to 400K, and then through a series of events turned its value to 20 mil. And he was very deft. He knew real estate, and he had his bros that he would rarely see ever, but they were all in the real estate game too in other parts of town, and they would get together now and again. And I remember clearly, I did kind of what you did, where I'd just love to help. I'd love to learn this. And so I was sweeping floors and collecting rent checks and just learning. And I was blessed to even receive a paycheck to do it eventually. And I did this for him for several years. And I remember walking in the room one time, and I was kind of familiar with his guys. And I remember them. I didn't even notice it until I thought about it later. But they were sitting there and they were going, "Oh yeah, have you been down to the club? Yeah." And they said, and it was pause. It was within the pause. They said, "I don't think I'm going to deal with Steve anymore." And his buddy was like, "Huh." And that was it.
That was it.
And Steve never got a deal again from these guys. I'm not saying Steve was ruined. I'm not saying Steve didn't go make his own money. But I knew that in their soul, they would never even answer this guy's phone call again.
For sure.
And it kind of freaked me out because I was young 20s, and I was like, "Oh my God, have I done anything to get blocked like that?" So that's where that question came from, because my mentors, man, that when they said it, you're right, they said it soft, but they meant it forever. It was just,
you could see all of the back thought in their faces, but it's words unspoken. And that's the thing about that level of individuals. You go, okay, I think I know what's happening right now, but you're never going to say it outwardly. So you really got to learn to read between the lines. Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned, oh, have you been down to club, whatever. That is how a lot of these guys will test your salt initially. Be like, oh yeah, I had dinner at Perry's the other night. Where were you at? And you say, oh, I was at Kirby Steakhouse, or I was at Steak 48 or something like that. And they go, oh, okay. So you understand class to some degree.
To some degree. You don't even have to do it well. You just have to know the etiquette of what we're talking about. And
the unwritten are so much more important than the written ones.
Yeah. And honestly, I would eat hot dogs with this guy on a hot dog stand. He would not care. But when his people came in the room, he had to trust that I wasn't going to make him look stupid or silly,
Right.
So it wasn't about, they weren't like class from the aspect of I won't rub shoulders or I won't go get a street taco. They're not like that, but they do want to know that I'm paying attention to who I'm around,
right,
and what I'm doing. Mark Sheeran says, know your numbers. What are your conversion rates on call? 1, 2, 3 with prospects. Save time, energy by focusing on call 1 and 2 because conversion is too low for time cost on call 3. Interesting. Now, did you ever get into this degree of nuance with your clients on the sales side?
Level. A lot of these guys generally, before we come in, they don't even get a second call because it's a burn the ships mentality. Like, hey, I have one shot at this, and we try and nurture that out of there. But again, if you put them in a CRM and a drip campaign, I agree. If you're calling 3 times manually and you're just trying to beat the dead horse, also you got to realize at some point, the second week of what we do generally for training is all of the nonverbal communication, voice inflection, videos about that. And then also reading your prospect and reading objections. Because you can come over and overcome 100 objections, but if they just don't want it, they don't want it. And that comes back into another big piece is setting expectations. I teach all that when you walk in a house, say, hey, here's what I'm going to do. Here's the agenda for today. I'm going to give you all the information that you need to make an educated decision. But I just want to let you know it's okay to say no. And that immediately they go, okay, cool, man. Yeah, let's talk about it now. Because a lot of these people are nervous. They don't want some pushy sales guy in their house. So if you give them the out at the beginning, it's always a much more fruitful meeting because then they're going to be honest with you, at least to some degree.
Yeah. About sales, you just mentioned they don't want a pushy salesman. I got to be honest. I've been around, like I mentioned, this solar guy. He was a poor salesman, but he was not pushy. Right. He was just avoidant. We have anecdotes about pushy salespeople and sales in general tends to petrify both the buyer and people who might have to get a job in sales. This question is to both of you. Can you actually remember the last time you had an a-hole pushy salesman? I can't remember one. That you were the consumer of. But we have this anecdote, right? In this fear. Right. So where do we think this stigma comes from? Both the fear of selling. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I would think it comes from the old stigma behind car salesmen. You know what I mean? Like there's that
Yeah.
that's the biggest stigma. So they assume that all salespeople are just like car salespeople.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where it comes from. But yeah, I couldn't tell you the last time that I had one of those.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's different tiers. So, okay, kind of coming to a little bit of the end of this, but I do want to know, we have talked about a sphere that you run in and the sales sphere. I'm willing to bet your skills transfer very seamlessly from one to the other. But what's one principle at the deal-making VC funding level that you wish someone would have told you because it would have saved you a ton of time? That is nuanced to it.
As trustworthy as somebody is, get everything in writing. Because there are groups that will let you go out and let you work for 6 weeks for free on a project and find investors and find offers, whether it's through regular banks or private groups. And then they will take that exact offer that you have and take it to the rest of the people that are working on it, and they'll beat you by 1%. And that's it.
Jessica, you sounded like you said, like, have you had that experience?
It just makes a lot of sense. I mean, people do that a lot.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and surprisingly more than not, again, we'll try to keep it out of the religious space, but a lot of times when that happens, it's like really, really devout members of churches, from what I found. Again, not saying that's always the case, but a lot of people that go to church and are very active in the community tend to have that type of mindset at a high net worth.
You know what's interesting about that? I have a very strong church background. I was a minister. I think we talked about that. Yeah. Jessica has a strong ministry background in history. And I don't know how to face the church without some of these critiques. I remember when I moved to Lakeland, the small town where I'm in. And in Lakeland, the small town I'm in, it became almost a joke that if someone had an ichthus, the Jesus fish, on their business card, they were going ahead and telling you their service was poor. Like it was just known. And it's like, man, do yourself a favor and you could do one or the other. Be Christ-centered and deliver on that level, or get rid of the Jesus fish and deliver poor quality or backhandedness. And I don't know what that is, because were you raised in a charismatic background at all, Tristian?
I mean, more or less. My mom is pretty quiet and tempered, but my dad's a hoot.
Well, I mean, so I came from a Pentecostal church, and I was raised a lot of
Catholic. So
okay,
different, but yeah.
But I mean, in my Protestant background, and Jessica, maybe you could even agree or disagree on this, prosperity was a major message. The blessings of God if you follow God's principles. Yet, when we contrast it to the wealth mentors we were just talking about, all of the signaling of poverty is dripping off of people who talk about prosperity in the church. And that's just one parallel in my experience. That's just one parallel. And when it comes to deal making and trust, in their minds, they don't feel like they're breaking trust. They feel like, well, I'd rather take this deal to my brethren or my Christian people. And I don't exactly know you. Thanks for the hard work, but we're going to actually take it from here. And it's like, well, we're just being good stewards, brother. And it's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? So it's interesting you say that, and I only say that in my heart, not to. I've beat up the church enough in my past. My heart these days, I would love to actually start a podcast for ultra high net worth Christians, and just like deal with.
I think that would be interesting. I think that would be interesting.
We got to face it down, man. Tempest Counseling, very interesting, says a lot of direct sales teaching often comes off as pushy when people just learn it and attempt to apply it without integrating those approaches, and it begins to feel awkward and pushy. A lot of direct sales teaching often comes off as pushy when people just learn it and attempt to apply it. Yep. Yes. Have you guys been victim or been that pushy salesperson who learned a tactic, applied a tactic, and realized, that came across too pushy? Have either of you had that moment consciously?
I would think maybe once or twice, like especially when you jump industries. Like when I was in the business to business print industry, sometimes you think that you're being firm, but you're just being rude and going, and going back and going, can't do that again. Here's where I did it wrong. And really being willing to critique yourself rather than just think everything's going right. That's the other downfall. If you can set your ego aside when you're a salesperson, you will do phenomenally better.
Oh yeah. Jessica, have you ever been a pushy saleswoman?
I mean, I tried, but I mean, at the end of the day, I just want to give people what they want, and if they don't want it, I'm just like, okay, fine. Like, I'm not very good at like overcoming objections. I'm like, oh, you object? Okay, that's fine, that's cool. So I'm
That
not
makes a
super.
lot of sense. You want to go get coffee instead?
Yeah, see, yeah, I'm not great at sales. I need some serious training.
I think the biggest thing that a lot of salespeople fail to realize is it's not about convincing somebody to do something. If you can educate a prospect to at least a base level of how they understand your product, again, it's a much easier transition because the biggest reason that people say no, they don't understand it, they can't afford it, or they don't like you. That's it for the most part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard that before.
There are 10,000 ways to say that, but those are the three underlying reasons.
Yeah. So fun fact, in my 20s, I did over 30 different MLMs. And that's how I cut my teeth on in-home sales. That's why I asked the question about MLM. I would love to go back in and create a sales program for MLMs because business model wise, not Ponzi schemes, but legitimate MLMs, I think that they provide a lot of upward mobility for those who really are struggling below the poverty line. But the desperation drips off of them, as we have alluded to, and they learn these techniques like Tempest Counseling is pointing at. And they got desperation plus a tactic equals pushy salesperson. And I was a victim of that. And my friends eventually got to the point where I said, I don't even want to hear what you're doing anymore.
Right.
Like I don't even want to, because, and I didn't know. I mean, it was like having a booger on my face. Like, I'm just selling everything. You're going to love this new coffee. You're going to love this new water filter. Come on. And they were just like, Grant, I'm sick of it. So that's true. And so whether you leave your baggage at the door or whether you internalize the tactic, let me ask that. Do you teach tactics with your clients? Like to this, like what Tempest is talking about here?
Well, I wouldn't say we teach tactics. The biggest thing that we focus on is obviously we're going to revamp your process and rewrite you some variety of script. But the area that we spend the most technical time on is transitions, words, and how to flow the conversation forward with soft skills, not direct movements.
Yeah, so like what we might call in other schools of thought, word tracks. Like,
Yep.
Yeah. We talk, I mean, Jessica and I talk about, she's our comms person, by the way. And so we talk about like, hey, how should we word this email or how do we make this happen? And I have this phrase in workouts. So I used to work out with a buddy and we would be doing push-ups and then like he'd have to get up for jumping jacks and he'd lumber up. And I said it one day, it came out of my mouth. And later I said, that's a life principle. And it was mind the transition.
Yep.
Because the money is in the transition. In working out, it's not the push-ups you're doing alone. It's how well you know to transition into the jumping jack. But it's the same in sales. In fact, with objections, it's just transitioning to that other thought that you had well so that you acknowledge them. You don't sound incompetent. You know what's going on. That is a great point, Tristan.
Mm-hmm.
Mind the transitions. I dig that. Well, where can people... Oh, go ahead. What was that thought?
Yeah, and then on top of that, just don't forget to ask for the business. You'd be shocked how many guys just like don't ask for the sale. Like, okay, awesome. So what do you think? Oh, I got to think about it. Okay. If you don't have a strong closing statement, it doesn't have to be pushy, but having a strong closing statement or alluding into the next thing. Like if you're financing something, you look at somebody and go, okay, have any questions? No, great. Next step is to get you signed up for financing. Here's what the terms of that are. Need your driver's license and this. And they're either going to tell you or they're going to give it to you.
Yeah. Here we go. Looks like a great offer, but it's up to you to take advantage of it. I've got to jump on another call here in a minute. So there's some urgency in that close. So Mark's got his own version of a close. So this raises a great question. Every salesperson worth their salt has massaged their own close. What for you has been the strongest closing statement that you have begun to own yourself?
I don't know if I have any single statement, but the word track of the tactic that I use is when I go to like recap the meeting at the end to make sure we've got everything covered, I'll give them 3 benefits of it and then 1 negative. Because if I tell you how great it is all the time, that it doesn't seem real and you think I'm full of it. But if I give you 1 negative at closing and say, how do you feel about that? We talk through that issue before I ask for the business. A lot of these, there aren't objections.
That's interesting. Yeah, 2 negatives in a close. You know, one that I used, especially if I'm getting a sense that the client is on the edge, is there any reason we can't do business today?
Right.
That's a big one. I love that one. And it has negative phrasing in it. You know, in that negative phrasing, so that people don't know, people are programmed to say no. And this tactic is huge. Negative phrasing is huge for a lot of things. And Jessica, even with your kids, people are programmed to say no. No, they're unpeople. And so if you can word it in a way that if they say no, it's saying yes.
Yep.
It short circuits their brain. And they actually have to then, they might still end up saying no, but they have to pause and go into their neocortex to unwind it. So you wouldn't want to get started with us today, would you? And they have to go, no, wait, if I say no, am I saying yes? And so they have to pause with that. And it makes them just think through something that they just would have. People just say no for reasons they don't even know why they're saying no. Mm-hmm. You know, and it could actually benefit them. That's good. Yeah. Well, so let me ask this question another way, Tristian. In your consulting, the years you guys have been doing this, you and your brother have been doing this, and the years that you've been closing, maybe not your go-to, but have you noticed a close that works the best on the averages?
The biggest thing, well, and again, my business model is different than most because I don't ask you for money. So if you say no, it's dumb. Like, what do you have to lose? But the biggest thing that I see there is a lot of times it comes back to, what the objections are in your industry, and you read that at the end. Again, it's strong opening statements, strong closing statements, and say, okay, here's what we have on the table. Does this make sense to you? Okay, awesome. Do you trust the company? There's a lot of different ways that you can do it, but a lot of these guys will be, do you like company? Do you like product? And do you like me? Okay, awesome. Sign here.
Yeah. Dude, you got Mark Sheeran going. Mark Sheeran's like, I'm pumped. I'm going to go sell some things. Mark, what do you sell? Put it in the comments and we'll hype you a little bit there. So while we wrap up, quick shout outs. We're coming to the top of the hour. Tristian, if you had somebody or some group of people out there to shout out today, who are you shouting out?
Yeah, I want to shout out you and Jarrett, man. You guys are doing some awesome stuff, and I'm glad that we could connect on here. And I love the positive conversation because, as we've talked about, it's difficult to find people that are at your level sometimes. So just to be able to really have somebody know what you're talking about fully and feel the same energy, that's huge for me. So shout out just for you and Jarrett.
You know I appreciate that. Jessica, what are your shout outs today?
I didn't think you were going to ask me that.
You're here.
I don't have any shout outs. I'm just happy to be here I've been taking notes. I'm archaic and I like to take notes. So I'm taking things away, that's for sure.
I'll say this. Shout out to the dreamers who are on a come up in circles that they might feel awkward in, but push through anyway. That's my shout out today. My shout outs to all the comments. Hold on. Jarrett says here we go. Finding someone to match your energy is undervalued. And I would agree with that. Tristian, we're becoming fast friends, I feel like. I have done the same with Jarrett. I've done the same with Austin. And so many of you guys. Jarrett says, got to run, great combo. And I think Web3 is doing this for a lot of us too. There's just some vibe about that. So shout out to all of you guys. Hey, where can people follow? Where do you prefer people follow you? On LinkedIn?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn. That's where I'm the most active. It's really funny because a lot of these other sales coaches, they have this massive online presence. And you and I have spoken about this, but I pretty much don't exist. Probably my exclusivity. But yeah, if you want to give me a follow on LinkedIn, shoot me a DM and we'll see if we can connect.
And you could always lurk the comments on the Not Crypto Bros. Tristan's there, dropping economics and all kinds of fun stuff. So thank you guys so much. This has been Jessica and Grant with Spark Sites and the State of the Spark. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll catch you next time.